US President Donald Trump and his team are discussing options for acquiring Greenland, saying the goal is always an option.
US President Donald Trump's pledge to acquire Greenland has taken another twist. The White House says all options, including military action, are on the table.
Now, we are going to do something on Greenland, whether they like it or not, because if we don't do it, Russia or China will take over Greenland, and we're not going to have Russia or China as a neighbor.
On a cold morning in January in Paris, a line was marked that few expected to be drawn so openly. Standing alongside Denmark's Prime Minister, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney delivered a strong statement that carried far more weight than simple diplomatic courtesy. Greenland's future, he said, belongs to Greenland and Denmark alone. No threats, no force, no outside power treating sovereignty as a bargaining chip. The timing made the message impossible to overlook. Only hours earlier, President Donald Trump had once again raised the idea of taking Greenland, openly stating that military force remained an option. That single exchange shattered the quiet assumptions that had shaped Arctic politics for generations. The region had long been guided by unwritten rules. American leadership, ally coordination, and a shared focus on containing Russia. Greenland stood at the center of it all. A vast and strategic island tied to Denmark while hosting a critical U.S. military presence. That balance held until Washington stopped speaking in hypotheticals and began issuing direct demands. Trump appointed a special envoy tasked with turning Greenland into American territory. The White House confirmed that force was not off the table, and suddenly allies were forced to decide where they stood. Carney's response went far beyond words. Canada announced a new consulate in Nuuk, sent its foreign affairs minister and indigenous governor-general to Greenland, and began coordinating Arctic security directly with Nordic partners. Ottawa aligned itself openly with Copenhagen, even though it meant pushing back against Washington. What followed was not quiet disagreement, but a rare and visible fracture within NATO's Arctic front. A move intended to expand American influence instead ended up tightening alliances everywhere else. How did a push for Greenland trigger the strongest Canadian-Danish partnership the Arctic has ever seen? Why did U.S. pressure create resistance rather than control? And what does this shift mean for the future of power at the top of the world? Greenland rarely sits at the center of global attention. Yet its scale and position make it impossible to ignore once power politics enter the picture. Covering roughly 2.16 million square kilometers with about 80% of its surface locked under ice, it is one of the largest landmasses on Earth and one of the least populated. Around 56,000 people live there, most of them Inuit, spread across coastal communities facing some of the harshest conditions on the planet. For centuries, Greenland has remained part of the Kingdom of Denmark, gradually gaining more autonomy while remaining within Danish sovereignty. That arrangement worked because it balanced local self-governance with external protection, and because no major power openly challenged it. That balance began to unravel when Greenland stopped being viewed as distant and started being seen as indispensable. Geography explains much of that shift. Greenland sits directly between North America and Europe, straddling routes that grow more important each year as Arctic ice retreats. Shipping lanes that were once theoretical are now seasonally navigable, cutting time and fuel costs for global trade. Beneath the ice and offshore waters lies something even more compelling. Greenland holds vast reserves of rare earth minerals used in batteries, electronics, and advanced defense systems. Estimates place the value of these resources in the hundreds of billions of dollars. Add the potential for offshore oil and natural gas, newly accessible as ice recedes, and Greenland transforms from a remote territory into a strategic prize. That reality has not gone unnoticed in Washington, Moscow, or Beijing. The United States already maintains a foothold on the island. Pituffik Space Base, formerly known as Thule Air Base, anchors American missile defense infrastructure in the Arctic. Its radar systems play a key role in early warning for North American defense, tracking activity across the polar region. From that position, the United States monitors Russian and Chinese movements while maintaining a strategic buffer across the North Atlantic. For decades, this arrangement existed without controversy. Denmark retained sovereignty. Greenland expanded autonomy. The United States operated its base. Allies accepted American leadership in Arctic security as part of the broader NATO framework. That quiet understanding depended on one assumption, that territorial borders among allies were not up for debate. Donald Trump challenged that assumption directly. During his first presidency, he floated the idea of purchasing Greenland, framing it as a transaction rather than a diplomatic impossibility. Denmark declined firmly, and the idea faded. In his second term, the context shifted. American nationalism intensified. Competition with China and Russia in the Arctic accelerated. Greenland returned to the spotlight, no longer as a curiosity, but as a strategic objective. This time, the rhetoric escalated far beyond talk of a sale. The White House revived the idea of annexation and attached something unprecedented to it: explicit references to military force as an option. Official explanations focus on security. American statements pointed to the need to deter Russian and Chinese expansion, secure access to critical minerals, and protect NATO's northern flank. On the surface, those arguments echoed familiar themes of global competition. Beneath them sat a more troubling message. Territorial sovereignty was being treated as flexible, subject to the demands of the most powerful actor in the room. An allied nation was being told that authority over its own territory could be overridden if Washington deemed it strategically necessary. That message landed hard in Copenhagen. Denmark did not hear reassurance about shared defense. It heard a warning that alliance membership did not guarantee respect for borders. If Greenland could be claimed through pressure or force, then no NATO ally could feel secure in its sovereignty. The threat cut deeper because it came from within the alliance itself. Trust, once shaken at that level, does not fade quietly. It reshapes how countries calculate risk and choose partners. That shift became visible when Canada stepped in. Many Canadian leaders in the past would have taken a cautious path, using diplomatic language to soften tensions while avoiding a clear stance. Balancing relationships with Washington and Copenhagen would have taken priority, even if it meant saying very little publicly. This time was different. Carney's statement came only hours after Trump renewed annexation threats, making the contrast unmistakable. Canada was not hedging. It was siding openly with Denmark against the United States on a question of sovereignty. Carney reinforced that stance with action. Canada announced plans to open a consulate in Nuuk, turning words into a lasting diplomatic presence. The move signaled long-term commitment rather than symbolic protest. The decision to send Governor General Mary Simon to Greenland in February added another layer. Simon is Inuk with deep ties to Arctic communities and extensive experience in circumpolar affairs. She previously served as Canada's ambassador for circumpolar affairs into Denmark, placing her at the intersection of Indigenous diplomacy and statecraft. Her presence carried multiple messages at once. It acknowledged Greenland's Inuit population and their right to self-determination. It emphasized shared Indigenous connections across Arctic borders. It underscored that Canada would not defer to Washington on Arctic Indigenous issues. Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand accompanied Simon to open the consulate, elevating the visit to cabinet-level engagement. This was not ceremonial. It was a deliberate show of support for Danish sovereignty at a moment when it was being challenged. Carney's language remained careful but precise. He spoke of self-determination, sovereignty, and territorial integrity as foundational principles. Each term directly contradicted the logic behind American threats. Denmark recognized the significance immediately. Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen thanked Carney for the clarity of his position and emphasized cooperation in securing the Arctic alongside all NATO allies. The phrasing avoided hierarchy. It framed security as a shared responsibility among equals rather than a system led by one dominant power. That distinction marked a subtle but important shift. Canada's stance did not exist in isolation. France, Germany, Italy, Poland, Spain, and the United Kingdom joined Denmark and Canada in issuing a joint letter defending Greenland's status. The language was unusually direct. Greenland belongs to its people. Decisions concerning Denmark and Greenland belong to them alone. 7 NATO allies publicly rejected American territorial claims against another member. There was no diplomatic cushioning. The response treated the threats as unacceptable outright. European leaders went further. Frederiksen warned that an American annexation of Greenland would effectively end NATO, a statement that would have seemed unthinkable only a few years earlier. The implication was clear. An alliance built on collective defense cannot survive if one member threatens another's territory. Trump appeared to assume European allies would protest quietly and eventually fall in line. Instead, they coordinated a unified response that left the United States isolated on the issue. Canada played a central role in that coordination. Carney met privately with Frederickson in Paris ahead of a Ukraine security summit, aligning approaches on Arctic security that excluded American territorial demands. The signal to other allies was unmistakable. Cooperation in the Arctic would continue, but not on terms dictated by Washington. For decades, Arctic security effectively meant American leadership with Allied consultation. That model collapsed the moment American pressure turned inward toward Allied territory. Mary Simon's visit to Greenland amplified these dynamics at a human level. Greenland's population is predominantly Inuit with a strong cultural identity shaped by centuries of resilience. Autonomy from Denmark developed gradually, with local governance expanding while ties to Copenhagen remained intact. American annexation rhetoric ignored that history, treating Greenland as an asset rather than society. By sending an Inuit governor-general, Canada highlighted indigenous connections that transcend national borders. The message resonated in Greenland, where self-governance and cultural respect carry deep meaning. The signal also extended back to Canada's own Arctic communities. Inuit populations across northern Canada closely watch how sovereignty issues are handled beyond their borders. Standing with Greenland reinforced a commitment to indigenous rights at home. Trump sought to assert American power through claims over Greenland. The result moved in the opposite direction. European allies treated the threats as risks to the alliance itself. Canada deepened its partnership with Denmark and Nordic states. Independent Arctic coordination accelerated. Indigenous networks gained political weight. Trust in American reliability weakened among allies who now had to consider the possibility of future territorial pressure. Once trust breaks at that level, it does not return easily. Even if rhetoric softens, the memory remains. Canada and European partners now plan Arctic security with the assumption that American positions may conflict with Allied sovereignty. Joint exercises among Canada, Denmark, Norway, Finland, and Sweden proceed without automatic U.S. inclusion. Intelligence sharing grows more selective. Economic planning reflects similar caution. Access to rare earth minerals, Arctic shipping routes, and northern infrastructure increasingly aligns with partnerships that do not depend on Washington. The global implications extend beyond the Arctic. Allies elsewhere observe how territorial threats were handled and draw conclusions about the reliability of American guarantees. When a leading alliance member treats borders as negotiable, others look for ways to protect themselves. Alternative arrangements gain appeal. Multilateral coordination replaces hierarchical leadership. Influence shifts not through defeat, but through withdrawal of trust. Greenland is not becoming American territory, and that outcome tells a much larger story than a single failed ambition. What truly shifted is a balance of trust and leadership in the Arctic, where American authority is no longer taken for granted. Canada made a clear choice to stand with Denmark. European allies reinforced that decision, and the region moved into a new phase where cooperation no longer depends on Washington's direction. The Arctic is changing because its partners have realized they can coordinate, protect their interests, and move forward without waiting for a single leader to set the course. If this kind of power shift and global realignment matters to you, make sure to subscribe, because this is only the beginning of how these decisions will reshape the world ahead.